And you also mentioned the idea of having, you may not have meant it, but you mentioned the idea of having the ability to vote be restricted by some type of an exam, by whether you have knowledge on the issue. I have two things to say. One, the true solution to that question is to not have referendums as often.
Right.
But the other one is implementing your policy would become abhorrent immediately. And Aristotle, a long time ago, wrote about that. And he didn't write it in terms of, I mean, he basically said, if you want a stable polity, you want to have the suffrage be as extended as possible. Because at the time they were debating, there were people in the aristocratic side that said, only the people that are really smart or really powerful or have a lot of money or have a lot of military force, the ones that if the city is attacked will be there to defend it. Only those should have the right to vote. And Aristotle wisely wrote that independently of whether that makes sense or not, if you have a restricted suffrage, you basically have the enemy within the walls. So if you restrict suffrage and the enemy attacks you, and you only have the right to vote for 20% of the population, not only do you have to fight the enemy outside the walls, you also are going to have the 80% that you took the right to vote away from, who are going to be siding with the enemy. Then they're going to realize, okay, you didn't represent us, let's get rid of you. So
that makes sense, but in all fairness, that was, what year was that? It was.
I mean, that's 300 BC.
Yeah. So,
but my point is,
people weren't as educated. The general population wasn't as educated. So I think now.
And even then, he was saying, let's spread the suffrage.
Well, yeah. So that 20% may go up to 60% in our current society.
And the way to achieve your goal is to have the right to vote. Is to have the vote be voluntary. And in practice, in your average congressional election, only the people that are most committed and most interested vote.
That's kind of how it is anyway, right?
Exactly. That's, so in the United States, the right voting is a right. You can exercise it or not.
Yeah.
And we are, in essence, already sort of getting the goal that you want.
Yeah.
In that only the people that are most interested and committed vote. There are other countries where they make voting compulsory. And it's not that compulsory in that if you don't vote, you have to pay a fine, and there are and the fine might be $5. So they take the
seems problematic though.
But there are people who choose not to vote, say as a point of principle, and they have to pay the $5 fine. But there's literature about this, and this is somewhat interesting on the types of politics that you have in countries where voting is voluntary versus where it's compulsory. And there is the philosophical question as to whether you should make anything compulsory in a free society. But leaving that aside for half a second, the evidence does seem to imply that in countries where voting is voluntary, extremist politicians have a harder time getting a hold of power.
Oh, interesting.
Because, and in countries where voting is voluntary, if only 40% are voting, if you convince 21 to go with this crazy idea, and 60% of the voters are not engaged, then you can have weird results just because 21% of the population voted some crazy in.
Yeah.
And because of all of those range of arguments, I think that over the last 2,500 years, we have moved in the direction of spreading the suffrage all the more. And whereas suffrage is not perfect, I think any idea of considering restricting the suffrage to me, is a non-starter. And again, I'm not dictator of the universe. I don't get to dictate that. But that's my reading of the data.